All right, great. Well, welcome, everybody. It's great to see you all here today. I'm Adam Hewson. I'm with Deloitte, and still trying to figure out how to use a clicker, apparently.
There we go.
There we go. There we go. Perfect. So Adam Hewson with Deloitte. I work in our strategy and analytics practice. Spend most of my time working alongside healthcare organizations as they're looking at strategic transformation through both growth and then technology as well. So based in Boston, and great to be talking to you today about the Data Value Accelerator and what we're doing with Databricks.
Cheers, Adam. So when Adam first reached out to me, it was brilliant to be able to have the opportunity to speak alongside Deloitte. This Data Value Accelerator is really, really exciting stuff. And I actually lead at Databricks, I lead the value acceleration team. So when invited to talk about something to do with value acceleration, I'm all in. So here we are today talking about this topic. Just as a quick introduction to what I do here at Databricks, in my role, I help our customers to really understand and quantify the business impact that Databricks drives for them. So a really large part of that is understanding where customers sit on their maturity journey and actually helping them to use that data to really inform what they do next. Are we taking off a large slice with that first use case in terms of the value we're expecting to deliver? Or are we taking manageable steps towards a bigger outcome that we can build to over time? So I'm really thrilled for us to be able to kind of talk through this topic together and see where we can land it. So again, given values in the title, I thought it was appropriate for us to start with the value. Let's have a bit of a conversation around just how big the opportunity is here. We're all here at the Data and AI Summit, so I think we're all kind of mutually understanding that the value of data and AI really is quite substantial. There are plenty of stats from a whole host of places you can go to understand the impact is big. What we often look at Databricks is we use a study from McKinsey that helps us to quantify that broader impact, but there are many, many sources you can look to find that the opportunity here is massive. I promise I prepped this slide before Jensen and Ali got on stage for the keynote this morning, but I was so glad that they called out a few things in particular because I was thinking about presenting this slide in front of you later on today. If you have a keen ear, you might remember that Jensen called out that he thinks that there's one area that's going to deliver the most value from generative AI. Anyone remember which one it was? It was customer service, absolutely. So looky here, we've got customer service right here on the page. There are a whole host of examples of customers that are using generative AI to unlock value in customer service, but I've got one favorite in particular. There's a customer we've worked with recently who's an insurer, and they had this problem around the way that they help their customers. They wanted to essentially reduce the amount of time it takes to solve customer problems when they call into their customer service helpline, and they thought this is a really good problem to solve with generative AI. So they started, as a lot of customers do, with a RAG use case. They took a lot of their knowledge base, they put a RAG interface in front of it and a Gen AI chatbot, and now all of a sudden the customer service agents can use that chatbot to interact with the best knowledge that was available at the insurer and generate better answers for their customers. I thought this was a pretty good example of a customer who's early on the maturity curve using generative AI to help their customers. But when things got really exciting, when they actually tapped into some more of the advanced capabilities that they could use to help their customers. What they did next was they ended up adding a live streaming service to that same chatbot. So they were able to listen to the customer service calls live while the agent was on the phone, transcribe the call, and instead of the agent needing to type a question into the chatbot and wait for a response, the chatbot was being queried automatically and generating live responses so that the customer service agent could either ask more pointed questions to get to the bottom of the problem and diagnose it, or they could connect the customer with the right solutions to overcome their problem. But this is where the real potential lies. When you're able to kind of tap into the advanced capabilities that present themselves in data and AI, you can unlock much, much more value. And the way it transpired for that particular customer in the insurance industry is they were able to reduce the time to first resolution. They were able to reduce the amount of time spent on each call. And curiously, they actually increased the amount of revenue they were pulling in from cross-sell and upsell opportunities. So when we start to tap into these things, it becomes really clear that the value is huge when we look at it in abstract, but excitingly, we're also seeing real customers tap into that value and realize it day to day.
Great, thank you, Gavin. So I want to step back for a moment and talk a little bit about what are we seeing as we look at generative AI adoption. And so have a few key findings here that are from some of the recent research that Deloitte's been doing in the market around the state of generative AI with different organizations that we're working with. And I think some of these themes that we see here, you will have been hearing about in other sessions here today, just because I think this is a consistent set of challenges, issues, situations that our organizations are facing. So the first that we're seeing in the market is an increasing focus on value with a lot of the organizations that we work with. Up until not long ago, as organizations were examining generative AI, there was a lot of exploration, a lot of experimentation and consideration of what are the different use cases, proof of concepts that we can try. But it was much more of that stage of trying out and understanding what the possibilities are. Now, organizations are starting to ask, well, what value can we drive and hold their teams accountable to actually delivering on that value? And in some situations, there's still a bit of a question mark on how the value is actually measured. In healthcare, where I spend a lot of my time, yes, it's quite easy to look at how would we increase productivity, what's a potential cost takeout that we could drive here. But on the other side of things, questions are coming up along the lines of, well, how do we prioritize value around mission or impact on communities? And we have an increasingly important role, especially for some of the nonprofit organizations. One of the other big things that we're seeing is scaling is hard. I think there are all the challenges that we see with data analytics and AI broadly around making sure you've got the right strategy around your portfolio, and you've got the right infrastructure in place, you've got the right teams in place. But on the other side of this as well, increasing challenges in scaling around risk, around having the right policies in place to manage where you're focusing generative AI and the results that it's driving. And so organizations are grappling a lot with what do we need to write, how do we need to educate our employees on this, and how will we govern models as we continue to develop and build them. Trust is key. It's key for adoption with employees, with customers, and it's critically important to success and ability to actually scale and then drive value. And I think the trust element is both in terms of the employees asking, can I trust these results? Is this information I'm getting truly accurate, and will it allow me to deliver what I need to? And then there's also a trust element with employees of, well, what does this mean for me? And what does this mean for my role in this organization? And will it replace me? And this is where we see an increasing need for further change management, transparency from organizations in exactly how they're looking at driving scale and value through generative AI. And then lastly, evolving the workforce both on the front end and the back end. So on the front end, organizations are focusing more on, do we have the right skills? Do we have the right teams? Are we upskilling? Are people learning and developing the right way and actually understanding how to use new solutions that we're developing? And then on the back end, the question of, well, once we've actually deployed and once we've actually scaled, are we then reorganizing our operating model to make sure we're capturing the value? So if you're driving a 20% productivity saving within your call centers, are you rethinking about how the teams are distributed in your future operating model to capture? So what we've been developing is the Data Value Accelerator. And so this is a diagnostic that we can run with organizations. It's a cloud-based tool that leaders, functional leads, both business and technology work teams can take. And it allows us to pinpoint across a set of domains what's working, where are they performing strongly in their data analytics and AI programs, and where maybe there's some challenges as they think about how they're driving value. Once we collect the insights, it automatically generates an output for us so we can understand where does the organization rank. It'll suggest initial recommendations that then as we're working with an organization, working with Databricks, we can then surface what could a roadmap be to accelerate value. Diving in a little bit, and maybe hard to see some of the colors here, there are 6 different pillars that we examine as we're doing this. And these focus on strategy, where we're drilling into how well is your overall vision and ambition aligned to the value that you're trying to drive? How are you prioritizing your portfolio? And then how are you starting to manage that as you're deploying it? From a data analytics and AI perspective, this is where we get into understanding, do you have the right data? Do you have the right data governance? And then how are you effectively driving proof of concepts from proof of concept through to scaling? Technology, much more focused on the underlying infrastructure. Is it inadequate to support the value and growth goals that you're looking to achieve? And where is there potential cost challenges that you may have within the organization? And then in operations, this is where we get a bit more on the right side here of these three, of looking at how are you structured? Do you have the right change management in place? Are you measuring appropriately, which really starts to push on ability to scale? And is your organization set up to appropriately scale the MVPs that you're developing? And then on the people side, here is really focused on how are teams working together? Do you have the right talent mix? Do you have the right literacy and learning and development programs to upskill, be transparent, and quite frankly, begin that journey of embedding trust within your employee group? And then lastly, though definitely not least, is the risk and compliance element, which really is about trust. It's about making sure you've got the right policies in place. The policies are actually activated rather than just sitting in a, interweb somewhere collecting virtual dust. That you have the right processes in place for bias mitigation, that you've got your own policies on how you're going to manage the ethics of the solutions that you're developing. So all in all, this is driving trust with the program and protecting you as an organization as you're starting to scale more broadly. Okay, Gavin.
Again, when Deloitte had reached out and said, this is an approach that we've been using with our customers, it really jumped out at me just how complementary the partnership is between Databricks and Deloitte. Databricks really has some peaks. We excel as it comes to the technology and to the data analytics and AI, and some parts that we often, we're not as focused on as a technology company are the operations, people, strategy, risk, and compliance. And so in partnership with Deloitte, we're actually able to kind of look at this entire spectrum and be able to guide and serve customers no matter where they are on the maturity scale across all of these 6. So it's a really, really exciting way to frame it and really helps us to overcome some of those biases we may have towards one or several of these pieces. It's actually really important to look at the whole set if you're to achieve success with data and AI. So to that end, we recently actually applied this framework in order to assess where a set of customers sit on their maturity scale. So just a couple of months back, I had the pleasure of being back in my home country in Australia at a conference in Manly Beach. If you haven't visited Manly in Australia, I would highly recommend it. It's worth a look. And we had 50 CIOs that gathered from across the Asia-Pacific region, and we gave them a scaled-down version of the survey that Adam had mentioned in order to assess where they sit on the maturity scale. And here's the aggregated view of what those results look like. And there are a few things that I take away when I start to see these results. The first thing is that the folks that were in the room were actually above the global mean, the global average of respondents that actually responded to this survey. They were just above the 2.9 average. They were doing okay relative to a lot of organizations that have taken this study over the last period of time. Curiously though, all of the respondents were actually below this really important threshold, this red line that we have highlighted. And that red line indicates the 50% likelihood of being successful with a given data and AI initiative. So what we're referring to there, if you have a whole host of shots, a whole heap of projects that you're pushing forward that are related to data and AI, if you have lower data and AI maturity, you have a lower chance of succeeding with each one. And for the respondents that were there in the room, their maturity was such that all of them actually had less than a coin toss chance of actually succeeding with those data and AI initiatives. So this was a real eye-opener for those in the room. As you can imagine, the folks that were in technology and in services, they had a little bit of a lead. When you look at the distribution, they didn't have that much of a lead. And so this really was an eye-opener for the folks in the room to really think through how they can address some of these challenges and push themselves further along that maturity curve. Another cut on the same set of data that's worth considering. So when we break it down along those dimensions that Adam had called out a few moments ago, there were a few parts that were missing. the parts that folks were actually lacking on the most, the 3 dimensions that needed the most attention, were people, operations, and risk and compliance. And so here at a technology conference, you might have thought that it's actually the technology that folks were lacking, that was the area that they really needed to dive into. But no, it was a lot of the softer things. It was the people and operations. So how do you actually spin up things like your ML ops practice in order to drive forward your people in a way that can deliver value? That piece was missing. On the risk and compliance front, I'll have an example a little later in the talk that brings this to life. But the risk and compliance was actually something that they were further behind than they would like to. And this has real consequences in terms of the kinds of use cases you can tackle and the kind of value you can actually unlock from this technology. And so here with this view, with this assessment, we're able to then guide and kind of focus our efforts. What are the dimensions that we actually need to push forward most in order to help these customers to unlock as much value from their data and AI as possible?
Great, thank you, Gavin. Mm-hmm. And a few other findings as well, and I'm going to skew more to the governance and the people elements here from an organization we were working with recently, where we were running DVA with them to help them figure out their data analytics and AI program. And their team, they discovered as they were going through this, and they were having challenges with value realization, they were having challenges with prioritization, and overall sort of their roadmap of where they were going to head as an organization. And we discovered as we were, deployed DVA, and then we worked through them with the outputs, that there was a lot of lack of alignment and clarity across their teams within their interaction model of how they were actually going to work together. There's a lack of clarity around how they should prioritize use cases to focus, and then where they needed to drive their investment. And so as we worked through this with them and helped them surface this, the next step from this actually was to help them redesign how do they structure, how do they build their center of excellence about both identifying, prioritizing, and then driving use cases that were important for the organization. And I think actually as they use DVA, the question they then asked us is, well, can we use this on an annual basis to continually sort of measure how we're performing, and are we actually moving the needle on structure and where we're positioned as we think about making improvements as an organization. Some other examples as well where we've been trying to tackle some of these more governance-based issues with organizations. Recently, we worked with a leading biopharma organization. Their mandate, their top-down mandate, and interestingly, actually, each of these examples here, the mandate was from the CEO. And what we're seeing with generative AI value, partially because of the noise in the market, partially because of the pressure from boards, is that it's often the CEO or the C-suite that is driving that need for driving value through generative AI and needing a message for the market, a message for their shareholders. So in the leading biopharma example here, their goal was driving a 25% productivity, at least, in every use case that they wanted to build for the organization, which would both be on a cost reduction or a revenue uplift standpoint. With a major telecom organization, and the CEO's goal here was, how do we drive $1 billion in cost reduction with initiatives across the organization? And to help them actually build a structure to achieve this, we developed a center of excellence that was focused on building standard prioritization processes, standard underlying infrastructure that their teams could leverage as they're identifying use cases to build, but at the same time, federating it out their business units. So the actual ownership of use case prioritization, use case build, was the business units versus it being from one central team within the organization. In another example of this, and then on the third one here, is a leading healthcare payer and provider. They sort of went a different model to the telecom organization, where their focus was on this centralized value driving model. Their argument to us was, this is new. While we built the infrastructure, we've put in place the policies that we need to guide where we're developing use cases. We want to test it first before we start rolling it out to our teams. And so this went with a much more centralized governance model that would allow them to drive value. I'm going to jump over this one because we've covered this. Okay, Gavin. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you, Seth. So we have a handful of additional examples here in terms of the impact that you can actually drive from generative AI. But again, as things evolve, we actually had I had the pleasure of joining a whole heap of customers here at Data and AI Summit. And so I have some examples that are one example that's even more hot off the press that I'm going to scratch these and go to that one instead. And that example is actually from an organization that does charitable giving. So essentially, if you've ever given to a GoFundMe or given to a cause like that, where someone's able to post the cause, you're able to understand where it is, and there's a little temperature gauge of how much money they've raised. There's an organization that sits behind that. And what they found is that there's a big challenge for folks that are actually looking to post those fundraising campaigns. If you think about the Venn diagram between people that have a really worthy cause and have really good writing skills, the overlap isn't actually that big. And so there's this real challenge. You're stuck looking at a blank sheet of paper and you really struggle. How am I going to get my message across in a way that's going to connect with people and actually help the fundraising campaign? And so this organization used generative AI to actually make that process easier. Instead of writing a beautifully written output, the question is instead, help me understand a few specific things about your cause, and then generative AI is used to help them to generate that story in a way that will really resonate with folks that visit the site. Now, what the end outcome of that process was that we found this organization found that the time taken to actually generate the page was drastically shortened, so the onboarding process for customers was much simpler and faster. And then most importantly, the degree to which those campaigns were actually able to achieve their targets, that increased really significantly. So the communications were actually more effective in achieving their fundraising goals. Now, I think that's an interesting use case in isolation, but it's when it starts to tap into things like the center of excellence that Adam had just mentioned, that's when I think really things start to get exciting. Because this organization branded their center of excellence as an AI factory. And what they mean by that is they have a whole host of generative AI use cases that they consider. They build a business case for each, and then they prioritize based on the value that they expect they'll be able to unlock from them. What they quickly realized is that the use cases, like the one I described just now in terms of the charitable giving piece, very few of them are able to be performed without tapping into their proprietary data, without tapping into data around philanthropy that they have within their walled garden, within their data platform. And so what they needed to do, once they'd tapped the use cases that just needed a user to type something in, they needed to access their own data, which meant that they needed to progress along that maturity curve. They actually needed to be able to govern and secure that data effectively so they could tap into it and then improve other parts of their customer experience and improve other parts of their business. And so I'd encourage you, as you're thinking about the value you can unlock from generative AI, so we're thinking about the impact you can make, but also thinking about what's actually possible given the level of maturity that your organization has. Because when you're thoughtful about that piece, you're able to bite off a manageable chunk in terms of the impact you can make, and then actually invest in your capabilities in order to unlock additional value. Now we'll open it up for questions in just a moment, but before we do, there's of course a call to action here at the end. And that is, if you think that what we've talked about here today is something that could impact your business, we would love to give you a hand. Please do reach out. We'd love to perform an assessment with you in order to understand where you fit on this curve and where we might be able to help as the kind of dynamic duo of Deloitte plus Databricks, how we can help you to progress along that maturity curve and unlock additional value. Adam, anything I've missed? It's both of our names out there.
Yeah, no, I think we're good. We're ready for questions.
Perfect. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us today, and we're really looking forward to helping you with this.
Thank you.
Thank you.